What is going on, my fellow movie nerds and geeks alike? Today, I have a bit of another list for you guys. It has been a while since I've done a video like this, so I wanted to do one that's more geared in a certain genre rather than dealing with a certain time of the year or holiday or something like that. And something that I'm really passionate about that I've never really talked about, at least genre-wise, slasher films. I love slasher films. It's a genre that I've always sought out movies from, whether they're good, they're bad. I've always wanted to see like any slasher movie that came my way.
Bruh.
We are going to eventually get to my top 10 80s slasher films. Now, we all know what a slasher film is, right? We've all become accustomed to this genre, but we never really take a look at the definition or what these things are defined as. So today, let's take a look quickly at what the definition of a slasher film might be. A slasher film is a subgenre of horror films that involves a killer or a group of killers who stalk and murder a group of people, typically using bladed or sharp tools. And while the term slasher may sometimes be used informally as a general term for any horror film involving murder, film analysts identify a specific set of characteristics that distinguish slasher films from other horror subgenres. Slasher films generally follow a particular pattern. A past wrongful action leads to significant trauma, which is often triggered by a commemoration or an anniversary that reactivates the killer. These films often include stalk and murder sequences and engage the audience's emotions such as catharsis, recreation, and displacement. And sometimes these are also related to sexual pleasure. Slasher villains are often human killers whose actions are considered objectively evil because they are bound by human morality. This concept plays on the fear that killers can exist in real-life society. Now, there's no real evidence to see where the term slasher film was coined. People say that it was, it came from a lot of reviews from people like Siskel and Ebert when they'd be reviewing like the sequels from Friday the 13th films. It's just something that came into the lexicon while describing these 80s teen stalk and slash movies. Horror films have been around since cinema has existed, You obviously had the Universal monsters. It's kind of hard to generate an origin point to slasher films. You'll get people that'll say it started with Hitchcock's Psycho. And then you'll get people that say, oh no, it started with Peeping Tom. Oh no, it started with Bob Clark's Black Christmas. But I think a general audience will say that it really kicked off and started booming after the release of John Carpenter's Halloween. Slasher films were born not only out of John Carpenter's Halloween, they certainly were kicked off by that, setting off this slew of copycats, but they also were born out of Hitchcock's work. And the Italian Giallo films were just gaining lots of popularity. So it took everything from these other areas and kind of made it its own amalgamation that became the modern day slasher film. And no matter where you lie, those are films that are significant to the start of the slasher film. And of course, the slasher boom started with Halloween in 1978. Now, film historians will say that 1978 until around the mid-80s was the golden age of the slasher film, where there were hundreds, even thousands of these films being made. Alright, now that we are educated on slasher film history, or at least know what it's defined as, right? Now, I figured the 1980s, because it was the golden era, would be the prime place for me to start with a list like this. I also gave myself some strict guidelines to abide by here. I'm not going to include any creature features. I'm not going to include any possession films. I want to do strict bare bones slasher films. And I'm also not going to include any of the big IPs. So you're not going to see a Jason movie on this list. You're not going to see Freddy. You're not going to see Michael Myers. And you're not going to see Leatherface or Chucky on this list. Let's get into what I consider to be the 10 best slasher films of the 1980s. 1981's The Burning. Abusive former summer camp caretaker Cropsy, horribly burned from a prank gone wrong 5 years earlier, lurks around upstate NY summer camp Camp Stonewater with garden shears hell-bent on killing the teenagers responsible for his disfigurement. You can't really talk about slasher films from the 80s without bringing up The Burning. It is just an all-time classic. The Cropsy makeup by Tom Savini and that raft kill sequence is one of the most iconic moments in horror film history, at least in my opinion. And this one is just so fun to watch. Tom Savini, of course, the godfather of gore gags in the 80s. Tom Savini left the Friday the 13th franchise, and rather than doing part 2, went on to do The Burning. You also get Jason Alexander from Seinfeld getting his first film debut in The Burning, and seeing him with hair is hilarious. You also get Fisher Stevens in here. And just the story is just a classic slasher tale. A disfigured man is just stalking people in the middle of the woods, trying to get revenge. You get kids having sex in the middle of the woods, and Cropsey is just stabbing them with gardening shears. It's awesome. The woodsy setting is just something I look for in slasher films. It's something that obviously Friday the 13th influenced in my brain as something I should look for in these movies. You know, it almost is like a spiritual successor to a Friday the 13th film, and that Tom Savini special effects work obviously aids in that thought process. But God, I'm not going to spoil any of these films, but The Burning is just an all-time film that if you're watching slasher films, you have to watch The Burning. Slumber Party Massacre from 1982. A female high school student's slumber party turns into a bloodbath as a newly escaped psychotic serial killer wielding a power drill prowls her neighborhood. I love Slumber Party Massacre. It is just classic early 80s sleaze. You get girls dressed in sleepover attire with wearing nothing but underwear and a t-shirt. There's also really cool moments with the killer wielding a drill, which you don't really see all that often. Again, a lot of the slasher films from the 80s was almost how do we stand apart from the rest? Oh, give him a cool weapon of choice. The drill in this movie is just an iconic weapon, and there's just so many great moments in this film that make it memorable for me. There's a moment where the girls are ordering pizza, and when they open the door to get their pizza, the driller killer has already drilled out the pizza delivery guy's eyeballs, and you get some great imagery there. It's also campy in a sense, because even though the pizza delivery driver is already dead, the girls are just eating pizza off of his dead body, so it's just got a lot of funny elements there. They really nail the comedy aspect without making it seem like a full-blown comedy. It's almost just a level of schlock that really adds to the appeal of these movies for me. An escaped mental patient is such a perfect killer in these movies, and this one just did it perfectly. Of course, in the sequels it would go on to be even schlockier, but the original is the one that's going on my list. It is just an all-time classic. It's everything I expect from the genre. And next up is 1987's Blood Rage. A boy kills a man and accuses his twin brother of the murder at a local drive-in, and the innocent brother ends up institutionalized while his psychotic twin goes free. 10 years later on Thanksgiving, the innocent twin escapes, which triggers his brother into killing again. An utter Thanksgiving must-watch for me here. This is a quintessential slasher film. It is just a kid walking around deranged, wielding a machete, chopping off people's arms, and then just displaying body parts all over the place. This has some of the greatest gore gags I've ever seen, and just some really, really funny moments that's not cranberry sauce. Bruh. It's just so great, and a lot of people don't really talk about Blood Rage that often. I mean, there's just blood and guts galore. You get the mother who is just constantly swigging wine and getting wasted, and there's ample amounts of sleaze in here, and just really cool characters, especially the psychotic twin brother. The shit that comes out of this guy's mouth is just so hilarious. Blood Rage is one I highly recommend checking out, and I mean, it's got a twist ending where you're just not sure of who exactly just died. Man, it is just a bloodbath, and is one that you really, really need to see if you're diving into the slasher genre. It is perfect. Next Thanksgiving, make sure you add Blood Rage to your watch list. Slaughter High from 1986. 8 people are invited to their alma mater for their 10-year reunion, where a fellow former student, Marty Ranson, was disfigured from a prank gone wrong that they all contributed to, and this time, he's out for revenge. It is a film that people don't really talk about all that much, and I'm not really sure why. It is the perfect campy, schlocky slasher film in my opinion. It's got that classic trope, right, where there is a kid in high school or just a young kid who is bullied to the brink. And this one pushes it even further, where this kid is literally accidentally set on fire and burned by acid. And then 10 years later, he invites all these fucking asshole bullies to a fake high school reunion, where he proceeds to murder them one by one. You got Caroline Munro, who is a final girl in like almost all of these early 80s films. I even think she's like almost 30-something, playing like a high school student in this, but great to see her in here. And it's really cool to see a killer wearing kind of an original mask. He's wearing like a jester outfit to hide his disfigured face in this, and he's just killing people in really awesome, different ways. There's a moment where he kills these people having sex on a bed where the bed is electrified and they just get electrocuted to death. He poisons beers. He gets a guy that is just like run over by like this fucking lawnmower. You really kind of root for him. It's fun when you get to root for like the killer in a movie. It's like, they tortured this fucking kid, man. Kill all these assholes. Wait, did that really happen? Was this a figment of his imagination? It's kind of up to your interpretation. But I really love Slaughter High, and it's definitely one I check out almost every April Fool's Day. And next on my list is 1982's Pieces. The co-eds of a Boston college campus are targeted by a mysterious killer who is creating a human jigsaw puzzle from their body parts. Pieces is an all-timer. People that are into horror movies obviously are going to be knowledgeable of all these movies I'm talking about, but it's hard to deny that Pieces is one of the greatest slasher films of the 80s. It is Spanish in origin. It's also kind of almost Giallo adjacent. The idea of this killer going around like chopping off people's body parts just to make a human jigsaw puzzle is fucking phenomenal and awesome. Obviously, the Giallo influence can be seen in the fact that like there's so many red herrings in this. Like when we're trying to figure out who the killer is, there's so many people where it's like, oh, it's definitely the fucking custodian who just looks really mysterious and is wielding this chainsaw. It's gotta be him. Great gory fucking deaths as well. Like, how about that knife going into the back of that woman's head, or the girl just getting chopped to bits in the elevator by a fucking chainsaw? Insane. And how could you forget that iconic moment? Bastard! Bastard! Great killer reveal at the end, which you kind of can see coming, but maybe not. You don't need to go to Texas for a chainsaw massacre, baby. 1984's The Mutilator. A college student who accidentally killed his mother as a child decides to take his friends to his father's fishing cabin during fall break, not knowing that his crazed father is stalking the place and beginning to pick them off one by one. I absolutely adore The Mutilator. It's a film that when I'm thinking of a slasher film, it is just like one of the first things that comes to mind, because it's the stalk and slash elements that make slasher films great to a T. Buddy Cooper, the director, absolutely nailed it with this one. An average guy who is just deranged and dealing with this trauma from years prior, deciding, you know what, I'm just gonna kill all these teenagers. Parading all his friends at this house, I'm gonna kill them all. I mean, he's hanging people with giant fishing hooks, killing people with the motors of a boat, and he's using these crazy, awesome, like, weird bladed weapons that you've never really seen. All these unsuspecting kids just getting picked off one by one. This is one that everyone kind of talks about when they talk about slasher films, and it's with good reason. It's just everything you want from the subgenre. It's just fantastic. I know Buddy Cooper's already filmed and made The Mutilator 2. Like, I don't know who the hell was asking for that. And God, like, the ending of The Mutilator was so definitive. Why do we need a sequel? 1981's My Bloody Valentine. An explosion at the Valentine's Bluffs mine trapped 6 miners underground. Harry Warden survived in a deranged state. Warden is sent to a mental hospital but escapes and murders those he deems responsible for the mine accident. Now, 20 years later, people setting up for a Valentine's Day dance are being brutally murdered again, and the townsfolk suspect that it is the work of Harry Warden. Or is it? This is an all-time classic. I don't know what I can say that hasn't already been said about My Bloody Valentine. When you're talking about the slasher subgenre, it is quintessential. It has everything you want from a slasher movie. Masked killer. Who is it? Is it Harry Warden? Is it one of these goofy kids working the mine, just killing people? He's killing people in really awesome ways. He's carrying around a pickaxe, of course, and driving it through people's faces. He's taking, like, young girls and sticking them on shower heads, and water is just squirting out of their face. It is awesome and over the top. Brutally intense, honestly. You get a lot of kids partying, which is like a classic trope in these. If you're partying, you're gonna get killed. So it's like, there's lots of kids goofing off, and you know they're just gonna get picked off one by one. And a lot of like the gore gags are just fucking awesome in this movie. You don't want to do a Valentine's Day dance. You don't want to be partying. Harry Warden's gonna get ya. I always miss that in today's movies. There's never like that ominous guy walking around Crazy Ralph from Friday the 13th lore. Like I said, what more can be said? Everyone's seen it, and it's for good reason that a lot of people talk about My Bloody Valentine. It is just a classic. Deserves more love than it gets. It is everything you want from a slasher film. 1980 classic, Maniac. Frank Zito misses his mother, who was killed in a car accident years before. She was abusive to him and made money selling her body, but Frank still misses her. He tries to keep her from leaving him and reform her evil ways by killing young women and putting their scalps on mannequins, which he displays around his apartment. Maniac is another one where it's just like, I don't know what more I can say to convince you that this is a classic. Iconic imagery. I warned you not to go out tonight. It's something you've seen for years. Joe Spinell's deranged killer is an all-time villain in horror cinema. He's just this like grotesque, like chubby, sweaty guy going around killing these women at night and scalping them and putting their scalps on these mannequins in his apartment. It's gross. It's disgusting. It is disturbing. William Lustig absolutely nailed it with this movie. Joe Spinell's performance in this is just so believable, and the way he looks all checks out, you know what I mean? And the gore gags by Tom Savini are just some of the most insane shit you've ever seen. I mean, talk about one of the greatest head explosions in cinema history. And it's actually played by fucking Tom Savini himself. It's just great. It's really kind of like almost psychological in nature. Joe Spinell's character just like being so fucked up that he just decides that he has to kill all these women. You're just like, dude, this guy is fucked up. It plays so well, and the cinematography is great, and just like having all the mannequins kind of like almost in his head talking to him is so deranged, dude. What a great ending this film has, where you're just kind of like, holy shit, what the fuck is going on? These mannequins are coming to life? Or are they? You know what I mean? It's just a classic that needs to be seen, and of course everyone's already seen it, but that's why it's on my best of list. Intruder from 1989. The overnight stock crew of a soon-to-be-sold local supermarket find themselves being stalked and slashed by a mysterious maniac on what may have been their final night employed. Intruder is an all-timer, man, especially for the late 80s. This one has some great moments that you really don't expect from the later 80s slasher films. I feel like by the late 80s, the MPAA was already gutting these films of any great gore gags. But Intruder does not hold back, man. You get people that are put on a deli slicer. You get a head squished in like an elevator kind of shaft. You get people put on like meat hooks. It's just so schlocky and awesome. And what a great location for a slasher film. Everyone shops at grocery stores. It's like, what if we were being hunted in one? I love it to death. Also, some really cool appearances from like Sam Raimi, Ted Raimi, and Bruce Campbell show up in this film. And the killer reveal in this one, like, even though you kind of could see it coming, is just like very believable and awesome. I've just always loved Intruder, and I feel like people don't talk about it enough. It's one I revisit often, and me and my wife constantly are always saying to ourselves like funny little quotes from this movie, like, here comes fucking Parker. Boy, is it gory for a late 80s slasher at a time when movies were being gutted to death by the MPAA. Intruder is, of course, going to make my top 10. And finally on my list is Joe Zito's 1980 classic, The Prowler. An unknown killer clad in World War II U.S. Army fatigues stalks a small California town, bent on reliving a 35-year-old double murder by focusing on a group of college kids holding an annual graduation dance. Now, I may be partial to The Prowler because most of it was shot in Cape May, New Jersey and the surrounding areas. I'm proud of my shitty little state, you know what I mean? I think The Prowler kind of gets overlooked when we're talking about slasher films. Tom Savini's gore gags in this are some of the best ever put to film, in my opinion. And the fact that they almost get like drawn out and made longer almost makes you like wince in pain waiting for them to end. Especially the kill, like when the Prowler is sticking the knife through the guy's head and he's just like twisting his head until his eyes goes white, kept on the screen for so long that it makes you uncomfortable. Or the fact that the killer is using like a pitchfork to stab a woman in the shower and then leaving roses on the people's bodies. It's just something that's unique and I've always really appreciated. And the killer's motive in this, essentially coming from being left out to dry by an ex-lover while he was away at war, is something that is believable to me, you know? He's out fighting for his country and his girlfriend just leaves him high and dry. It's made him gone crazy, and guess what? All these years later, he's gonna kill all these other people just trying to love each other, you know? It's just something that makes sense in my head anyway. Tom Savini's gore gags in this, it's some of his best work to date. If it's something you've noticed, and a lot of the films I've talked about today did a lot of the effects work for a lot of 80s films. The godfather of gore himself, Mr. Tom Savini, the fucking maestro of splatter. Him and Joe Zito would also work together later in 1984's Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter, which I'm obviously not including in my list. But if I did, honestly, it could be my #1 favorite slasher film of all time, because to me, it is the ultimate slasher film. The Prowler predates that, and it is almost like a precursor to how great the slasher genre would become. And a lot of people will say it's a little boring, it's a little slow, but I kind of always liked the pacing, you know? It takes its time. It's everything I really want from a film in this subgenre. And again, Savini, just like he did in Maniac, he gives us one of the greatest head explosions ever put to cinema again. Prowler is one of my favorite films of all time, not only slasher films. God, I love The Prowler. It's got great New Jersey roots, great gore gags, and just like a fun storyline that I really enjoy. Alright guys, so that was my list of my 10 favorite 80s slasher films. Obviously, there are hundreds, thousands of slasher films from the 80s that could have gone on this list. These are just the ones that I really, really love and would add to my list. It kind of makes me think, makes me really kind of be critical about what I would put on this list, which is why I only chose these 10 and chose not to include like the big horror franchises in this list. It makes you look deeper than the obvious. So be sure to let me know in the comments which ones you would add, or tell me I'm an idiot for adding some of these to my list. Thank you so much for watching our silly little videos that we put out there, and look forward to, in the future, videos like this, or continuations of this series, when I will dive into other decades, you name it, what have ya. We really enjoy doing these silly little videos for you guys, so we'll see you shortly, I'm sure, so look forward to those future videos. And until next time, guys, always remember, the horrors persist, but so do we. Adios.